let me say hello, and I'll invite you to share a bit from where you're connected this morning. Maybe use the chat, everyone, and share where you are connecting from. So we can use the time. Good morning from Berlin. I can say that, and I see that in writing. Paris, wonderful Spain. Brussels, the Netherlands, and Belgium. Oh, Beate Ubitz is in the Pyrenees in France. That sounds great. Sunny Brussels. That sounds great as well.
Okay, I'm sorry, it is not sunny. I'm looking out my window here. It's not sunny in Brussels.
Sunny in somebody's heart. Wonderful. Oh, from Kiev. Hello to Ukraine. That's great. You can join us here. Germany, Zurich, Rützi, Tilburg, Cologne. Wonderful. Welcome, everyone. Hungary is in the room as well. That's really nice to see. Yeah, great. While everyone is getting in, let me wish you all a good morning. And welcome to this webinar, Cycling Towards the Paris Agreement, in a webinar in which Jill Warren, the CEO of the European Cyclists Federation, will report about how cycling was treated at COP29 in Baku recently in Azerbaijan, where she attended. And that place, where she put cycling on the highest global agenda. And I'm really great that you all made it, or really happy that you all made it to this short notice webinar. We organized this really quickly because when we figured out that Jill has a lot of interesting insights to share, we thought, let's hold this webinar before the end of the year, as long as this is really relevant with this kind of one crisis and headline hitting the next. Let's get these information and insights before they get old and the next COP is bigger on our heads. So it's really nice you're all here. My name is Dagmar Köhler. I'm from Mobicon. We are one of those founding organizations of women in cycling, together with the ECF, the Cycling Industries Europe, Konabi, and Velo Concept, all in the room today here. Thanks everyone for your support, but even more important are all of you, like the women in cycling or those that are supporting women in cycling. And it's really cool to see that we're getting most of Europe together in this webinar. And while this geographic scope and distribution is like one of our great strengths, it's also one of our key challenges, because we've often had this situation that people would like to network and get to know each other, but we can hardly ever have an opportunity to get together in person and just have a chat. And therefore, I'm really happy to share that for this webinar, we have a little Easter egg or Christmas gift, an early Christmas gift, because following those requests, we're trying out something new today. And we will use the final 30 minutes of the webinar to allow for individual networking among each other. And so you will need your microphone for that in the end, but not yet. And we'll explain how this will work later on. So that's going to be from 12 to 12:30. But first, we have an hour to dive into the topic. But to get to know you all a bit better, because it's not that huge of a room this time. We're about 50 people. That's wonderful. So maybe share in the chat, how are you feeling right now? How are you getting into this webinar this morning? In 2 words. For me, I would say I'm a bit nervous and super excited. Nervous, excited is probably my 2 words. How are you feeling today? And as you're all typing, I'll invite those that will be on stage in a bit anyways. Jill, you can already say or share how you are feeling this morning.
Well, feeling very good, and also looking forward to a nice break at Christmas time after an autumn filled with more travel than I care to remember.
Okay, great. And people in the room are happy and curious. What a wonderful combination. Curious but in need of coffee. Oh yeah, I think that can be solved, that problem. Excited and curious. Oh, there's so much curiosity in the room. I love it. People are looking forward. All right. Okay. I think we'll start going. Oh, one more thing, and you can use the hand raising function, or if you like, who of you in the room has been at COP29 or any COP before? Do we have people in the room who have attended a COP? I mean, I know there must at least be one hand in the room. That is
At least two
Jill's. We
hands in the
have,
room.
yeah, and yours. So now we have
Well, no,
two more.
my colleague Frozo Christofidi, shout out Frozo. Frozo was there with me. I was not there by myself. So
That's perfect. So I see Frosus raising her hand. Perfect. And Julia Osada as well. Feel free to comment things in the chat later on. So that's great that we have a first-hand experience beyond Jill. And yeah, so what's the topic of today? We are going to talk about COP29 in Baku and still referring to this Paris Agreement with reference to goals. And if we think back, I think it was at COP 2021 in Glasgow, when active travel was squeezed into the declaration last minute. But now we are at a point where it's worth having a whole webinar about cycling and COP and declarations. And what we often hear, I think, when we talk about climate change and cycling is we really think we can solve the global climate crisis with the good old bicycles, you know, the few kilometers that an individual can cycle by day. And I'm sure Jill will shed some light on this, but I did some research, and I think what's relevant here is that 8% of global CO2 emissions come from urban transport. And probably the bicycle cannot replace the whole of urban transport, but imagine what's also accounting to 8% of global CO2 emissions, and that's the energy use in residential buildings. Globally, this accounts to 8% as well, like heating or cooling and cooking and things like that. And also, what is also an 8% share of global CO2 emissions is agriculture-related CO2 emissions from soil management, like liming and fertilization. That too accounts for 8%. And actually, the iron and steel industry, and we're often citing them, they account for 7 to 8% of global CO2 emissions. And same with the cement production. That's like one of these really CO2 intense industrial processes. 8% of global CO2 emissions are produced through cement production. So I do feel some impact on the horizon. And so it's so important that Jill and the ECF are doing this work on a global level. So I'm very happy to welcome Jill, the CEO of the European Cyclists Federation based in Brussels. Jill is actually of US and Dutch nationality, grew up near Chicago and in the US, but has been living and working in Europe for over 30 years. And actually, prior to joining ECF, and I would like to share this because your life, I think, is quite inspiring in what you've been doing. You spent over 20 years working at major international law firms, so you made quite a shift in your professional topic, I suppose. Jill, you're also a mom of 3, and you've been awarded the Danish Cycling Embassy's Award for Leadership in Cycling Promotion. So I'm really happy to hand over to you and hear what you've been doing as a leader in the sector. And for everyone else, this webinar is being recorded so that you are aware. Questions to Jill, we'll take them after her presentation. And please use the Q&A function on the bottom of this Zoom room to submit your questions. If you want to chat with each other, then the public chat function is there as well. But now, Jill, I'm very happy to hand over to you.
okay. Thank you so much, Dagmar, and thank you for the introduction, and thank you also for talking a bit about the emissions, which also point to the potential that we're targeting when we think about reducing emissions globally. Maybe to dive into the urban transport topic a little bit more, we see so much potential for cycling and active mobility because in globally, about 60% of urban trips are 5 kilometers or less. And those are distances that are eminently cyclable or walkable. And if you think of the potential of e-bikes, which can increase people's range to up to 10 kilometers, that gives a potential of about 75% of urban trips that could be switched to a more sustainable mode like cycling. Yet today, over 50% of those trips are still taken by motorized vehicle. So that just points to some of the enormous potential that there is. And that is a statistic we use really quite often in our advocacy for this topic. But I'm going to share some slides that talk a little bit about the COP. What is it? Who goes? Why are we there? What did we do there? What did it bring? And I'll try to share my screen now to do that. Here we go. I hope everyone can see the slides. So the picture up at the top there is me and my colleague, Frozo Christofides, who's also on the in the audience of our webinar today. So everything that was done was also together with Frozo. Right. So COP29. What is COP? I hope that for those of you who know all about the COP that you don't get bored, but I thought it was interesting to just kind of say a little bit about, what is this? So COP stands for Conference of the Parties, and the Conference of the Parties are the parties to the UN Framework Convention on Climate Change. That's the UNFCCC, as they call it. And they have an annual International Climate Summit. And at these COP conferences, that's where the world leaders come together to work together on the solutions for climate change. And currently there are 198 parties, so that's 197 countries plus the EU, to that convention. So the Paris Agreement is what we're all working towards at the COP. The Paris Agreement is a legally binding international treaty on climate change, which was adopted in 2015 at the COP21. And the overarching goal of the Paris Agreement is stated as to hold the increase in global average temperatures to, well below 2 degrees Celsius above pre-industrial levels, and to limit that increase to 1.5 degrees above pre-industrial levels. Not an easy thing to do, as it turns out. How do countries do their commitments in terms of what they're going to do to help achieve the goals of the Paris Agreement? They do those through a mechanism called Nationally Determined Contributions, or NDCs. And these are basically national climate action plans. In most countries, these are handled through the kind of environmental ministry. It can be different per country, but that's an interesting point, because whereas for cycling, our advocacy targets at a national level are very often the transport ministries, those aren't necessarily the same departments or ministries that would be in charge of the NDC process. So these NDCs outline countries' plans for what they're going to do to reduce emissions. And these are updated every 5 years, and countries are supposed to have increasingly higher ambitions in them, but also in view of a country's capacity or financial means and that kind of thing. So the third version of these NDCs are due next February. So a lot of our lobbying all this year and last year as well was really focused on getting more ambition around cycling and walking and sustainable mobility more generally in these NDCs. So at last year's COP in Dubai, there was a lot about the so-called global stocktake. And the global stocktake was basically an evaluation of where are we now in terms of meeting the goals of the Paris Agreement. And the global stocktake was supposed to point to the areas in which much more ambition is needed in the next version of the NDCs. So who gets to go to the COP? You can't just sort of rock up and walk in. So they're not open to the public. They are very large. So in Baku, there were estimated 40 to 50,000 attendees. In Dubai last year, it was closer to 80,000. That was a bigger COP. So these are very, very huge events. But all participants who get in the door have to be duly accredited. And there's different categories of accreditation. So the pink badges, these are the parties, these are the country representatives who are there to negotiate and participate in those processes on behalf of countries or parties to the agreement. Then there's UN organization observers. Those are these blue badges. Then the green badges are what Rosa and I had. These are, sorry, we have the yellow badges. The green badges are the international kind of governmental organizations. You don't see too many of those green badges. I think I saw somebody with from the World Bank who had one of those badges. Then there's the yellow badges. That's the accredited NGO observer organizations, and ACF has that accreditation, which is how we get in basically. And then there's the orange ones, which are the press media. And there's a so-called blue zone at the COP. That's the part you have to have that blue zone badge to get in. And within that blue zone, that's where the parties are doing their negotiating. That's where the countries can set up pavilions to display what they're doing in terms of climate change. They usually have little seating areas or a place to hold an event and you know, to showcase different things. You have media and press area, and you have all these rooms for official side events, exhibits. You have some that are set up like ministerial rooms, some that are set up, you know, as big plenary rooms. It's very, very huge event. There's also a green zone. A green zone you can apply to, anybody can apply for a ticket to get in the green zone. That's where you have a lot of companies setting up pavilions or booths. I think they have to buy their way in to be able to do that. And that's usually not where people want to be or not where the action is, because where people want to be is the blue zone where all the decision makers and things are. But there can be some interesting stuff in the green zone as well. And in addition to that, you have offsite events. So people take advantage of the COP to organize, whether it's gala dinners or other things in hotels or other venues, you know, in the same city as the COP. So I'm going to play a little video here. It's just over a minute. It shows you what it looks like in the blue zone and just kind of shows some stuff that's going on there.
So we imagine we hear some nice music along with the images, right, Jill?
Sorry, Dagmar, did you say something?
Yeah, I said so we imagine some nice music along with the images.
Oh, there is music along with it, but you don't hear it?
No, we don't hear the music, but that's fine. We
Oh,
saw the images.
oh, okay. Sorry, I'll continue the video. There is music with it. I don't know why you don't hear it. That's it's probably in the settings somewhere, but okay, there we go.
So it's a very fast event of what I take from the images. Yeah, music and video implementation is always a challenge, but Jill, you can comment on what we see. I think that's just as fine.
Okay. Yeah, so this just shows what it looks like in there, some of the rooms, kind of what goes on. A few more seconds of the video. Okay. So in that video, towards the very end where you saw that big square table, so I was in that room. That was a ministerial meeting. I'll talk about that later, but very hard to find in the video. Anyway, um, I have one other video after this. It's also very short. It's even shorter than the one I just showed. but it also shows the part of COP where you have the country pavilions. And I think it's interesting to give a little view of what that looks like as well. So I've got to go to the next slide. I probably have to escape to be able to go to that one. Yeah, and do it again. So another just very short video to show the pavilions.
So have you had the time to visit the pavilions that we are seeing now while
Yes,
you
a
were
lot
there?
of the action takes place in the pavilion area. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. So that looks quite impressive. So this has a fair atmosphere, I suppose. You go and see, and countries present their solutions and
Very
ambitions.
much
Is that
so.
right? What did impress you, Jill? And you've not only seen one
Yeah,
exhibition in your
I'll
life.
talk in a second because I have the music in my ear that you guys can't hear. Okay, so I'm sorry that you guys didn't hear the music that went, the jazzy music that went along with those videos, but that was just to give you a flavor of what does it look like in there. So you have got the official rooms, you've got the pavilions. The pavilions are definitely places where people make deals, where countries are showing off what they're doing. Interestingly, every year I've been at COP, the most opulent pavilions where you can tell they've spent the most money really putting on a good show are the big oil producing countries or whatever that's worth. That shows you a bit of yeah, why some people are quite cynical about the COP for good reason. Um, but how, what was ECF doing there? What were we trying to achieve? Well, we participate in the COP through three main vehicles, if you like. So as ourselves, as an NGO accredited observer organization, ECF, we participate as part of a coalition called PATH, the Partnership for Active Travel and Health. That was a coalition started in 2022. The core coordinating partners are FIA Foundation that funds the work, plus us, plus Walk 21, plus the UN Environment Program. And then we have a wider group of four partners and about 120 some supporters of PATH. And so we've done campaigns and research and other evidence-based advocacy things to bring with us to the COP to make our case for walking and cycling and active mobility at the global level. Then we participate in working groups of the Marrakesh Partnership. Now that is the Marrakesh Partnership for Global Climate Action, or MPGCA. We participate in meetings all year round where this is a platform that brings together the parties and the non-party stakeholders. So as an observer organization, we're a non-party stakeholder. And the work of the partnership is guided by the so-called high-level champions. These are two very high-level people who have been appointed to these roles to make sure that that comes together in that way. There's 7 thematic and 2 cross-cutting areas, and our work is very much focused on the transport thematic area, and that's what we seek to influence. And so, as I mentioned, we collaborate in working groups throughout the year so that we know what's going on, they know what we would like to see at the COP, and that really helps us to get more visibility in the process. So I explained about the PATH Coalition. We call on governments and cities to make a real commitment to walking and cycling as a key solution to our climate, health, and equity challenges. So as a founding member and core coordinating partner, we're very, very involved in the activities of that group and using it as a vehicle for change. So at the COP, we are there to promote cycling and active mobility. We say you cannot have an achieved Paris Agreement without more cycling and active mobility in the mix. So we bring that message to ministry officials, to the development banks who are funding big infrastructure projects. We bring them to the COP negotiators. We bring them research and reports that make the case and lead campaigns to raise awareness and urge them to act. And interestingly, I mean, this is very globally focused, but because at COP we see so many of our European advocacy targets and the ministries and the European Commission and others, that this work also lends more credibility to our European advocacy and enhances and complements it, I think, in very positive ways as well. So PATH has produced a lot of knowledge products and guidance that have been really, really useful in this work. So the inaugural report, the Make Way for Walking and Cycling, is a report that brings together kind of all the existing evidence out there that demonstrates the benefits of walking and cycling. The statistic I quoted right at the very beginning, that 60% of urban trips are under 5 kilometers, yet over half are made by motorized vehicle. That, for example, is contained in this report. And the report is really great for laying out that case for why we absolutely need to, unlock the potential of walking and cycling. Then we did some research and analysis. So which countries currently have national policies for walking and or cycling? Which countries include commitments for walking and or cycling or active mobility in their nationally determined contributions? So what we were able to show through that research is, yes, you see that there are a number of countries that have walking and or cycling policies and or they have commitments in their NDCs, but so much more ambition and work is needed almost everywhere around the world. There are only 8 countries on Earth that have both a walking and a cycling policy and include walking and cycling in their NDCs. And almost all of these countries are located in the global south, interestingly. It's countries like Colombia, for example. And it's maybe not the countries that people would be thinking, in other words. So there's so much more to do. And so these tools, I would encourage everybody to have a look at them and use them. I think there's really, really good stuff in there that we can use in advocacy in so many different contexts. We also do campaigns as the PATH Coalition. So the last 3 years, we've done an open letter to national governments that calls on them to commit to walking and cycling in their climate commitments, to reach climate goals, but not only that, to improve people's health and lives. And we have gathered, well over 300 and in some cases over 400 signatures. We target NGOs operating in the sustainable mobility space to sign on to our letter. And it's really wonderful to be able to basically take all of those organizations with us to the COP and say, look, it's not just us here, it's all of these organizations doing such hard work every day that want you to pay attention and do more. And so we did a lot of social media campaigns around that as well. So at the COP itself, that is an opportunity for us to get in front of decision makers, to be visible at the people who are at COP. We do that by applying to host an official UNFCCC side event. So that was one of the things we did. We had 9 different events that we spoke in between Frozo and myself this year. So one of them was an official side event where we teamed up with the public transport and rail advocates to promote sustainable transport. Then I got to participate in the high-level ministerial roundtable with the theme of greening urban transport. So that was on the transport day of COP, and very exciting, actually, to be able to give a statement. how often do you get all these ministers in one room and you can talk to them and bring your message? So we do that. Then the different pavilions will organize events. And, maybe they only have a seating area for 20 or 30 people there, but a lot of these events are live streamed. So the number of people who actually see them is much bigger than the ones sitting in the room. And so we spoke at events in the Sustainable Development Goal Pavilion, the Benelux European Investment Bank Pavilion, Portuguese Pavilion, and the UK Pavilion there. Outside the venue, there was an event organized by a research institute and others, the Climate Compatible Growth Transport Day. And last but not least, and this was very special, it's probably not going to happen again soon, but I was invited to speak at the Global Climate Action closing event organized by the Climate Champions to represent the NGO observers. So there was the former mayor of Vancouver who was representing cities. There was a person representing indigenous peoples from Brazil, and then there was me representing the NGOs, and that was really quite special for us this year. So just to give a flavor of each of these events, just very briefly, here is the Climate Compatible Growth Day, where we talked about the template NDC. So PATH developed a template nationally determined contribution with lots of guidance and basically things that governments could cut and paste to add commitments for walking and cycling to their nationally determined contributions. So talking about that at this event. Then here's Frozo speaking in the Sustainable Development Goal Pavilion on unlocking the potential of sustainable urban transport. So she's on stage there with people from the public transport and rail lobbies, together with somebody from the World Bank Transport Division as well. Then the UK Pavilion, so that's the Minister for Nature, Mary Crea, on the left. Chris Boardman, Olympic gold medalist in cycling, also speaking. Myself, Arlette van Christ from the Dutch Ministry, and Lucy Anderton from the rail advocacy group, talking about kind of that intermodality with cycling and rail. This was our official UNFCCC side event, where we were promoting the template NDCs, also together with rail and public transport, because they've also developed template NDCs to really push governments to get more sustainable transport measures into their NDCs. This was the ministerial event. Yeah, what I found really exciting about that is, whereas 4 years ago at the COP26 in Scotland, what they were talking about transport, it was all about the electrification of vehicles, exclusively about the electrification of vehicles. Only by making a very big stink about it did we help get some last minute wording in there, also recognizing the value of sustainable modes. This time, when the ministers all gave their statements, quite a number of them explicitly mentioned cycling and or walking as something that their countries were promoting. And these countries included everything from Turkey to the UK to the European Commission to the Netherlands. And I think there were 12 or 14 of them in total that did that. I was blown away. Actually, I was keeping score when I was sitting in the meeting, because I was very amazed that a lot of them they just kind of realize now that they can't get away with only talking about the electrification of vehicles. So it's really becoming more mainstream, and the messages are being heard and absorbed and used there. That was great. This was an event organized by the Marrakesh Partnership, also talking about how we can make sure that this transition is just and equitable, and cycling and walking tick so many boxes there. So it was good to be able to talk about that. This was an event in the Netherlands pavilion, where we also had some from the Asian Development Bank, the World Bank. The second person in the second photo, the second person from the left is the transport minister for Chile, and he was wearing socks with bicycles on them. So yay, he's he's totally with the program. We love him. And then here's the event in the Portuguese pavilion that Frozo spoke at again. So also talking about how you can have a very integrated approach to sustainable mobility. And Portugal is doing some very exciting things, I think, in that area that also has an integrated approach across the different ministries. And this was the closing event, which was, yeah, very special. And it wasn't just transport focused, it was really wider in terms of how we all have to work more closely together to make these things happen. So very inspiring. Yeah, so there are a bit of media opportunities there. Cycling being something that's perceived as cool, I think it's also good to, they want to say, oh, yeah, and you do get the reaction, huh, cycling at COP? Oh, yeah. And then they think about it and then it makes sense, but it's not an obvious thing for people. So there were some people who cycled all the way to COP, the COP29 bike ride. So Guillaume and Yolaine, the two people I'm standing there with, they cycled from Paris all the way to Baku. It took them 5 months, and it was nice to have them there as well, showing how important this mode of transport is. And then I mentioned that the Path Coalition does its campaigns, and so there were a number of ministers who very kindly, or ministers or people from ministries, who very kindly agreed to do a photo opportunity where we were presenting them with the template NDC. It's got a QR code on there that people could link to the NDC, as well as our open letter that was aimed at governments to get them to commit. So we've got the minister from Chile, from Burundi, the UK, Somalia, the Netherlands, and someone from the US Department of Transport as well. So very exciting. So what did we achieve? Here in the social media posts that I did, I've listed all the countries where their representatives in the ministerial meeting explicitly mentioned cycling. So, that was a real highlight to hear that, all these countries, Azerbaijan, Burundi, Chile, Czechia, Kazakhstan, Lithuania, Netherlands, Romania, Turkey, Uganda, UK, UNECE, UN Habitat, ITF, etc., all showing how much more mainstream this is becoming. Then the templates that the Path Coalition developed, because we promoted these so heavily, they got included into, in the first instance, the International Transport Forum. So the International Transport Forum is affiliated with the OECD. They have 69 member countries, and our template was included in a guide that they distributed to all 69 of those countries, so to the top level officials at all of these places, so that gets our materials seen by that many more people. And the climate champions of the UNFCCC also included that piece of guidance in something that went to all 198 of the parties. So I think that's great because they see the good work we're doing. They want to help us proliferate it and disseminate it further. And that also gives it additional credibility to get it in front of the right people that they hopefully will act on it. And then last but not least, in the targets and that are mentioned in the frameworks that are used at the COP level, we have a recognition now that electrification alone simply will not meet the goals in terms of decarbonizing transport. So, there's a lot more talk about, they use the framework called avoid, shift, or improve. And the focus in transport for too long has been on improve, meaning improve the internal combustion engine technology to the electric vehicle or hydrogen technology. And that's been the way that it's been talked about. But now they're focusing more on this avoid and shift. So avoid travel in the first place where you can, but otherwise shift it to more sustainable modes, including walking, cycling, public transport, rail. And here is probably the most succinct way that it's been formulated in the UNFCCC targets. And this is called a breakthrough target because that's where they feel like something has reached enough of a tipping point that it's being promoted in this way. And I feel like we've had a very direct input in that with this sustained advocacy over the past few years. So this target is a very important one for us that certainly didn't exist at all a few years ago. And here it is again in this avoid and shift framework. And the Path Coalition is listed as one of the delivery partners. So that's in recognition of the work that we've done to push for and get this target through. And I feel like in summary that all the work we did as ECF and through the Path Coalition, that we helped ensure maximum visibility for cycling and active mobility and its essential role in achieving the Paris Agreement. So we just make ourselves very hard to ignore in that whole conversation. And that's it. I think I'm finished. I'll stop sharing the screen.
Oh, thank you so much, Jill. This has been such an interesting ride. To Baku and through COP. Congratulations! I mean, you've delivered apparently a lot, and what you described. So there has been a major step apparently then with regards to active travel. You mentioned a new target, the avoid shift improve paradigm being mainstream basically, mainstreaming active travel in general. The transport minister from Chile in cycling socks. I love that little story. So grateful that you share this here. And yeah, you did a lot. And also you mentioned the Dutch ministry representative Arlette van Gilst. She was actually interested to join us here today. Unfortunately, she's in the US for a training program at the very moment. So she sends her regards to everyone in the room. Jill, thank you so much. A virtual applause. I've got
Thank
a
you for
lot
the
of questions
opportunity. And thank
because
you, Frozo, as
yeah,
well. Frozo was absolutely involved in everything. So big shout out again to Frozo.
shout out to Frozo.
Yeah.
Yes,
Frozo
thank you.
Christofides from ECF.
She's in the room as well. Great.
I saw
I
her in the list of
yeah,
participants. Yeah.
absolutely. So, and before we dive deeper into some questions that either people in the room have asked or that I have, I'd like to ask everyone here for just some keywords of feedback. What are you taking from Jill's presentation or from what you've heard about Baku? Just write one or two keywords in the chat so we get a little bit of a feel what you find interesting. That would be really nice. Just use the chat, please. And while everyone is doing this, Jill, has it been a success overall? Taking another step back, because yes, there have been successes. And if you take that step back, so has COP29 been a success in your opinion? And what's the kind of homework you're taking with you now?
Yeah, I think what people know about COP is the real top level headline stuff they hear and see about it. And that is, oh, which world leaders showed up? Or, what's the items of conflict or whatever that kind of pop up there. And so this year, if you were basically looking at the couple minute news pieces on the COP, what you heard was, oh, it's being held in another fossil fuel economy kind of country. Yes. And they're pushing back on some of the commitments that were made last year, like the commitment to get rid of fossil fuels eventually. Yes, that of course, those very top level discussions are very difficult, but we're not really there to influence those anyway. That's not really something we would probably be able to do. What we can influence is what we try to influence, and that is all of the stuff that happens kind of underneath all of those layers. All of these different targets, and there's so many of them for like you said at the beginning of the presentation, whether it's in this energy performance of buildings or the steel industry or all these other things that create lots and lots of carbon emissions. There's targets associated with all of those that countries are working towards, and we focus on the transport part of it. So in the 2 weeks of COP, every day is a thematic day. And we focus a lot of our efforts on that transport day because that's when the right decision makers are kind of there. And we focus on what we can focus on. And so I think in what we were doing, I would say we made significant and real progress, even if you
Okay.
maybe wouldn't say that for the event as a whole.
Yeah. And what's the homework? What has to follow?
Oh, we keep at it. We keep everybody focused on. So we try to hold all of these countries accountable when the next version of their nationally determined contributions comes out next year. Of course, we want to analyze them again and we want to see what's the change from when we did the analysis at the end of 2023. How many more countries integrated walking and or cycling into their NDCs? You know, that's the progress we can track, and we can see where are the gaps still there, and how can we help to encourage them to do more in these areas.
So
So
it's a
that's
marathon and not a sprint, Jill. I think there is some really interesting feedback in the chat, and let me just give you that feedback as well. So we read inspiring and encouraging from alternative mode to mainstream. So that's also a lot thanks to your work, Jill, and your team. Amazing for cycling to be included. Congratulations. It was great to feel like visiting COP29. Efforts seem to start paying off. How can we go? Yeah, how can we go further? How can we shed more light to the global south? And I think we'll be talking about this in a minute because this is popping up several times here already. It's fantastic, thank you. And a lesson in persistence and keeping to make the point until we are on the agenda. Yeah, COP is shockingly slow to adopt bikes for transport, but glad it's happening finally. And a highlight cycling on the global climate agenda is great. And there's a nice final comment, slow but steady process or progress like a cycling trip. Uh, really, really good. Before we come to the global south, one question on the big picture. Because if you've cited COP26 in Glasgow in 2021, and we've mentioned it before, so this was the first time that active travel got into the final declaration, but it was also the COP where, you know, maybe you remember pictures and the images of this machine fights climate change, and where the bicycle for the first time was framed that way. What would you say since Glasgow? What was the headline for cycling at COP29? How was it positioned, and what was the kind of narrative, the story behind? Like, yeah.
yeah, I mean, COP26 was interesting. It was held in Scotland, and I believe it was an initiative of the UK cycling industry that kind of paid for this advertising campaign about this machine fights climate change. And it was right after Corona, the COVID, you know, the worst of the COVID pandemic, when there was such a boom for cycling and so much momentum related to that, that it was really kind of a moment thing that drew attention to cycling, which all helped with, you know, getting that wording in the transport declaration and things. So we haven't had campaigns quite like that in connection with the subsequent COP conferences. So it's really about, you know, us as the observer organizations making sure that it gets in there, you know, kind of somehow, but also with very friendly governments. Like, you know, the Dutch are always very happy to fly the flag for cycling, but not only them. I mean, you know, we saw that there's a number of committed ministers like um, you know, Juan Carlos Munoz from Chile and others. And we saw, you know, Burundi and Somalia saying, hey, this is, you know, this is fantastic, and we want to push that more here as well. So, oh,
Okay, so
I see someone, Anna Carboni. Hi, Anna. She says in the chat, how was cycling in Baku? I have to say, um, I didn't see a lot of people cycling, but they had some really interesting cycling infrastructure that looked brand new. So to me, it seems like they've redeveloped a lot of their public space quite recently to accommodate better walking and cycling. But I think the take up still needs to come.
some practical insights. And back to the narrative that cycling and active travel had in Baku. Would you is the potential of cycling to really significantly contribute to global CO2 emissions, is that like clear, and is cycling seen as something that can be an option for most people, or rather still as something for a minority? I mean, if we look at those 8% of urban transport emissions, depending on the scenarios, I think cycling has the potential to reduce between 1 and 3% of those eight, which would be significant. Do you think it's that clear compared maybe also to other sectors?
I believe that people are much more open to this possibility. I think 4, 5, 6 years ago they thought we were nuts. I think really the reaction was much more about cycling. What does, even in our more general advocacy where we say cycling needs to be treated as a fully fledged mode of transport. Now, people don't laugh at that anymore, but 4 or 5 years ago, we got laughed out of some rooms for saying that. So it really is a process of becoming more mainstream, becoming more accepted, becoming more something that people can actually imagine can help in this transport decarbonization. And people are also really waking up to all of the adjacent benefits that cycling
Hmm.
has, because it not only decarbonizes transport, it really helps with, the health and equity and other challenges faced all around the world.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Interesting. And of course, all the side or the cross-sectoral benefits that we are very aware of as a group. Maybe just into the audience, what do you think? How much does aviation contribute to global CO2 emissions? And it's that one most carbon-intensive transport activity that we have. Just a guess among everyone in the chat. Maybe just write a figure. What do you think? 3%, right? Right, Saskia. Yeah, she's well informed. Um, it's about that, depending on the exact modeling, but 3%. And here with cycling, we are also talking about a potential up to 3%. I think this is not mainstream knowledge yet, but of course the COP is not mainstream either. So I think that is quite interesting. Um, Back to COP right there. Who sits at the table? You've presented the different categories of participants. But which voices are maybe not heard? Who does not sit at the table? And we've had the question in the chat about um, what about the Global South? How can they join the discussion? And also, Angela van der Kloof asked, were there also cycling advocacy organizations from other continents present? And yeah, advocacy organizations maybe also asking about activists who may not be in the room. Is there a place for them? Are these voices heard, or which voices are maybe not heard, Jill?
Okay, so who sits at the table? Those are the negotiating parties. And every country who is a party to the Paris Agreement, so it's 197 countries plus the EU, they all have a seat at that table. And the every COP has kind of a main theme that the negotiators are working towards on a very high level. And this year it was about finance. So how are the richer countries going to contribute to the money that is needed to pay for all of these adaptation measures and things that need to happen all over the world, and especially to help the developing nations to do that, and the global South. And the result of that this year is that by far not enough was pledged. And quite rightly, the Global South is saying, you need to do much more, Global North. And they're right. So there's that. Uh, in terms of accredited NGO observer organizations, this is a status that is very, very difficult to obtain. And it has been made more difficult because they have such a backlog of applications. We've been told that the waiting list is 3 years or more. To be able to get this status. So accordingly, a lot of organizations who would like to have this accredited status don't have it, or don't have it yet. And we don't really see other cycling organizations there. Sometimes they go and they will be able to maybe get a ticket through a wider sustainable, some kind of sustainability NGO. So I sometimes have seen some colleagues from other cycling organizations in COP because they were able to get a badge for a couple of days off the coattails of one of these other organizations. But I guess the short answer is we don't really see other cycling advocacy organizations inside the blue zone at COPs. So we
Did
feel a big
you, yeah,
we feel a big responsibility to take them all with us. In other words,
yeah, yeah, maybe in a one either or question for you, is this about bottom up or top down policymaking?
it
What's your
has to be both.
preference on that?
It has to be both. But we're very much on the bottom up side because we have to, you know, use those convincing arguments to get the ones at the top to listen. Yeah.
Yeah,
Can I say a bit about the Global South? Because of course we're the European Cyclists Federation on the one hand, but we very much try to bring in the global perspective, especially through the Path Coalition work. So that Path Coalition work did the research across all the countries on Earth about, have they got the walking or the cycling policies? Do they have it in their NDCs? So that was a global analysis. When formulating our open letters and things, and there, I'm very happy to be working with, the UN Environment Program, Walk 21, that works more globally than ECF typically does, and the FIA Foundation, which is involved in funding a lot of different projects in the Global South. They're able to give a very experienced perspective on how we need to frame things, word things, etc. So, for example, in our demands, we say, um, we're so used to in cycling talking about modal shift, getting more people on bikes. But actually, when you talk about it in the context of active mobility, the way we phrase it is enabling more people to walk and cycle safely is necessary, da da da. Because that's what it's about. Because in a lot of the global south, you'll have countries where the modal share of walking is like 80%. It's not about getting more people to walk. It's about making sure they can do so safely. And, maybe it is about getting more people on bikes in these places with affordability, accessibility, right infrastructure, whatever it is. But we have to be very sensitive to how we frame things so that they fit much better in contexts that are maybe not the typical European context that we think about.
yeah, absolutely. And with the Path Coalition, you went into this kind of cross-sectoral partnership. I think it looks like quite an impressive partnership. And I've been wondering building alliances is are we there with the Path Coalition, or what do you think are the alliances that can really help make that point as strong as possible and actually lead to change? Because that is, it's good to be, to be included prominently in those declarations and in the pathways, but what matters in the end is the action that will follow. And what's the, what's the point of or the challenge with building those cross-sectoral coalitions? Where do we stand here? Are we there?
I think the sustainable transport ones work very, very closely together in a very cooperative and successful way. I think the fact that we can put together these side events and other events because we show that breadth of sustainable mobility, we show how it all fits together and how it has to be integrated, um, obviously makes our voice louder than if we're only just banging on about cycling all day long.
Yeah. Yeah, and to get to a close here, maybe some final reflections. Um, so first, you've been a woman in a great position at COP as well. What do you think how are women influencing global policy making at a COP? How is that representation? And then maybe taking and connecting this with an outlook, Jill, the upcoming COP 30 in Brazil. What are your hopes there regarding cycling and active travel, and how can we back you in achieving those?
Mhm. Um, First of all, I think if you just walk around the COP, you see a lot many more men than women generally. I mean, I think in terms of the negotiating parties, um, uh, the ones I see walking around with pink badges, just very generally speaking, there's a lot more men than women. Um, on the NGO side, I hadn't really thought about it, so I can't really say, gosh, were there more women, and to what extent does that matter for what we were doing there? Of course, it all matters. Um, you will see if you look at the whole list of side events and things that happen at COPs, there is a lot of focus on making things gender responsive, gender inclusive. There's a lot of conversations around making sure that investments take that into account much more than they have previously. So it is a topic, and I'm glad it's a topic. The whole inclusiveness, we've got to have climate change measures that work for everyone. And we need to not be leaving people behind. And it's very good that, in particular, the climate champions really try to refocus attention on that and bring those messages to all of the negotiating parties. So you do see that, and that's encouraging.
Yeah, great. Yeah, that's also been a topic
Yeah,
in the chat here
yeah.
about
You asked
inclusiveness.
how what you guys can do. So I would say next year, make sure that if you're a nonprofit organization, make sure you sign on to the open letter that we're sending to all of these ministers. If you work in national advocacy or you have contacts to national decision makers, find out. Read our study. Do they have walking or cycling or active mobility in their NDCs? If they don't, ask them why not. Give them our template. Say, hey, here's how you can integrate that there. And of course, the constant advocacy work that we do to try to encourage countries to have national cycling policies is a great way to have momentum and plans and funding and all of that stuff that encourages that cycling culture and get the infrastructure on the ground and everything that's needed. It's that advocacy that also will influence these other things.
So there are things we can do. Maybe we can also become a national decision maker, some of us. I mean, everyone here is in a different country. This doesn't happen overnight, but why not take on roles of power in everyone's career development? And Jill, I thank you so much for sharing all those insights. It's fascinating. I think we could continue chatting for a couple of hours if we had the time. Um, so thanks a million for sharing everything and for doing this just before Christmas in between everything else.